So, what we're going to be doing today is continuing on in our journey of looking at the death, dying, and bardo process, the stages. Today is stage 2. So, we'll begin with a little review. But first, nice little quote from Ra. Thanks, Ra. He says, quote, "Despite the somber, dark nature of the subject, it is in many ways for me as important as the life itself. We rarely have an opportunity to grasp the larger mechanics, to see behind the veil, to see the gears, to see all the mechanisms is something that opens up a different way of being able to look at the larger process. And for me, the larger process is a life. Life operates according to the rhythm of the moon." Ra speaks in this particular lesson about how the ancients in different cultures act that the moon controls reincarnation. So he says it's interesting. What's interesting when you think about the moon is to realize that life only operates according to that rhythm. So our moon rhythm, our lunar cycle, conditions life. It really does. It creates our life cycles. And the most traditional calendar were always lunar calendars because, and did you know that there's 13 lunar months in a year, not 12? So the lunar calendars, not because it was a primitive thing, but because they were correct, he says. In the sense that, yeah, sun gives us life, but moon organizes our lives into regenerative cycles. We who are women know absolutely how tied we are to the tides of the moon. Yeah. But the moon also brings death, as we have learned, and will continue to learn. So Ra would look at the lunar returns, and especially when he was doing the daily view. I mean, daily transits. Can you imagine daily transits from Ra? How cool. So he got really tied into that. The first teacher that he had was the moon, and that he looked at the moon's movement through his entire body graph and just paid attention. So it's not just a reflector thing to do. Each one of us can do this too. So trying to get a sense of the lunar rhythm, these tides that shift inside us, that controls how we may feel or experience ourselves or behave or be in the world. It's really profound, a game changer, you could say, because it's always running around in there, Ra says. And so it's going to keep a reflector functional, according to Ra. The moon keeps a reflector functional. And the basic programming engine of let's go get this and that and the other thing and get it all rather quickly, because we know it moves through a gate, 2 gates a day. Now, the 10, gate 10, so we're returning back to death, dying, and bardo. The moon transiting in gate 10 has an unusual frequency in that it focuses the potential of behavior on what our vehicle's potential is. So what he notices most about the moon in the 10th gate is that there's this dark side of the moon that emerges, and you don't really get to see it, this moon, the darkness of that moon in any other gate, at least from his experience, that you don't get this. Even the other gates that are a part of this death, dying, and bardo process, he experimented with watching all of them. And he did say that it could be his influence of the moon in the 10th gate for him personally, because he gets a very specific experience, a feed, if you will. So by being able to watch it in yourself or in others, you can see then the unusual frequency of the moon, right? It's mental focus, your mind, or it can also bring drive. But there's this inherent moodiness in the moon, right? No matter where you find it, it really affects us. If you go look at how many times the moon shows up as either an exaltation or a detriment. So here in the 10th gate, at some level or another, even to affect all of these gates, it focuses the potential of behavior on the potential of our body, our vehicle. So it might be a moment when the moon goes through the 10, or somebody in their midlife suddenly realized that they used up all their time and energy in a particular endeavor that maybe wasn't healthy. Anybody ever see that in someone else, or maybe you can personally agree, where you get some really stark reflections in the way that the 10 operates, particularly with this moon? Where, remember, the 10 is where we have our archetypal role lines, our behavioral role lines. So the model for all of our profiling keynotes happen here. This powerful impact of the moon on the 10th gate is quite clear. Gate 10, treading the behavior of the self. So Ra reminds us that the life process is actually a dying process, that the triggering of the dying process always is from the moon in the 10th gate. And so that means every month, like clockwork. Oh, are we going to die? Will it start here and now or not? So when you think about the lunar rhythm that you have in our lives, don't you have that lunar process too? The most clear to me is seeing it, how bright it is, and then not being able to sleep very well on those nights, which we just had that, yeah? So the lunar rhythm that everyone has, the plain physics of our relationship to this satellite movement, is that moon determines so much of the nature of life on this planet just by being such a close and impactful neighbor. It affects not just us, it affects water and tides and plants and all kinds of things, gravity, apparently. So we have, as a reminder, the second line was the hermit, the withdrawal from life, and the completion of form. Ooh, not just the perfecting of form, but the completion of form. So learning about these successful sidestepping of behavioral requirements through isolation, hermit. Successful sidestep of the behavioral requirements. I love that. So independent behavior through isolation, or isolation to preserve that independent behavior in the face of conditioning. What's the commonality? Independent behavior, regardless whether it's exalted or in detriment. So then we know it's about independent behavior, to preserve one's independent behavioral process. It's a timing mechanism when it comes to death. So the moment that there is this transition in behavior, where the behavior that is the root of getting ready to be able to leave the world, if you want to have a key or a focus to understanding the quarter of mutation, to really grasp the significance that is there in the 10th gate, which really launches the dying process. So when that death cycle begins, there is that unique taste that lingers. Remember, this is the largest swath of time between the stages. So as much as 11 or 12 days where your diet will change. And that change of behavior may not be something that you recognize in yourself. It may be even others don't recognize it, but there may be a diet change and a unique taste. And some people are really sensitive to that. So within the movement, you have this opportunity to come back into life and to continue your cycle. And this 11 or 12-day time frame is very important for all of us. This mutation that's here, remember, quarter of mutation, purpose fulfilled through transformation, that leads us into the quarter of initiation, purpose fulfilled through mind's process. So within that span, there's the initiation channel. The reason why this is called initiation, because that's the channel of initiation. And when you move into this quarter, you're moving into the realm of, let's reincarnate, come back into the world of form, the excitement of the mental plane, because the dimension of Maya, when you think about life, okay, let's just process what it is. If you could imagine closing your eyes, or if you want to close your eyes, if it's right for you, and imagine that everything that's outside of you is actually something that you're attuned to from inside. And that our eyes that see the world outside, we're actually processing inside, aren't we? Our ears that connect us up to the outside, we're actually processing the sound inside. Our body that we're experiencing because we have this embodiment of being incarnate into the flesh. Not fully, we're just a little personality crystal riding around on the top of the vehicle. But continually, if you would just pay attention, remember, this is the mechanics of Maya. And our science of differentiation shows how our human design attunes us to the world outside that is actually filtered from inside. So this dynamic of awareness, it's not necessarily that everybody sees the same way. We know that, but not everybody knows that. So your attunement to difference, uniqueness, when we're here on the mental plane in this dimension of Maya, you can open your eyes if you'd like, back into, look, the innocent spirit of the self and the shock of initiation, coming back into this embodiment in order to have behavior that is mutative and potentially different, particularly when you get to the 3 here, because that movement between 10 and 3 is coming back into life and continuing the cycle of this life. And we do this lunar cycle process every single month, where we're going through this death process every month at some level. Every human being, every month, going through a death process at some level every month. And because the density of the not self is so in your face, we have no real perception of what's happening unless you're getting close to that and you're attuned to that and you're pondering that and you're processing that. You know, we need guidance to get through this movie show of the death dying bardo process. Maybe not the bardo, but the death dying anyway, in order to prepare us for the time that comes for us to leave this plane. So now that we're moving into the gate 3, stage 2, gate 3, with the difficulty at the beginning, the gate of ordering, I recently went through my Chironian wound again because it's in gate 3, line 3, as far as where my planetary asteroid Chiron is consciously, and the unconscious is gate 3, line 2. So I went through that, and then processing that and realizing that we were going to be doing this today, I went into the genetic codon mapping. If you haven't heard of it, let me know. But codon mapping from Ra, obviously, and read through the codon that's in charge of gate 3. And there's quite a bit there. And I found it really interesting to process and ponder with this movement that happens when we get to the gate 3, because this is the closing of the cycle. Remember, this is very serious when it comes to having consequences inside of the body, the death process, because a couple months before you might die, you might look fine, but then when it's time for you to go, and this show, the movement of the moon clicking into that 3rd gate, that's when we can see things deteriorate rather quickly, right here at gate 3. So the codons of our genetics linking us up. It shows how each of the gates link to each other beyond just channels and gates and circuitries and streams. It's quite interesting to see the pulse energy here, how the duality of how we function accordingly to the nature of the pulse energy. So we often talk about this format frequency field operating in a pulse, okay? Operating in a pulse. Think about you in the hospital or any hospital movie you've ever seen, and you hear that beeping, you know, when your heart's beating and they've got the pulse on there. So imagine the pulse tightening where we don't have as much space between the pulses. Now, that's when the heart beats fast, right? And so imagine now on the other end of the spectrum, the pulse fading, where there's a lot more space between each pulse. We know that everyone has their own pulse, obviously. You can put your fingers down and feel it. So too do we individually have our own pulse energy. So when you look at the 3 and 60, the format energy of the individual circuitry, part of the knowing circuit, we are looking at this pulse of off and on, there and gone. And it's not a singularity, it's a binary because off and on. So if we think about what a pulse is, like a heartbeat, there has to be spaces between the heartbeats, like the music between the notes. There's space, there's quiet between words. We have to have a space for the in or out breath, for the sounds to have differentiation. So when we grasp that this third gate contains within it both the pulse and the space, this is where mutation takes place. And that's the great mystery of life. Mutation happens in gate 3. And when we're thinking about the way that mutation works in individuality, we're seeing that this is the pulse followed by a space, followed by a pulse, and everything can come along and come and go in a very different way. And then, so like thinking about the hospital where the pulse is rapid or the pulse is slow, just so that you can hear that beeping sound that they often have in the movies. Okay, so what happens if the pulse is steady? Let's say the pulse is steady. You're asleep. Your pulse is steady. What if you stay asleep in a coma for weeks, for months, for years? Stagnation, isn't it? And then what if you woke up? All of a sudden, something happens. Boom, you're awake. Something happens between pulses. Between pulses. So if we are wondering why, we have to go back to, when in doubt, zoom out, big picture view. We're always moving. Everybody forgets that we're always moving, spiraling through space and time. It looks like the sun is still, but actually it's spiraling too, hurtling at tremendous, unimaginable speeds around our Milky Way. And this is the funniest of illusions that our mind plays tricks on us with, in that because we're on a planet that's spinning at incredible speeds and we're moving around a sun at quite a speed, and the solar system itself is moving around the galaxy at speeds beyond our comprehension, hundreds of thousands of kilometers an hour, and yet we have absolutely no sense of that movement. Movement is everything. So Einstein's relativity, according to his prediction, as far as science is concerned, and it has been substantiated that everything has been moving outward in a unidirectional movement since the Big Bang, which means that everything is on a unidirectional trajectory. So when you think about the pulse, it isn't happening in a vacuum, it's happening in movement. Every other place in space has another potential. So there's this place where the space between the pulses is changed or impacted, and what comes back is not the same pulse anymore, but something new. We call it mutation. New pulse. If we were to individuate, let's imagine for a fantasy land for a moment, and all of a sudden that moon, we turn into a werewolf. Don't you imagine you'd have a different pulse as a werewolf than you would as a human? That's a mutation. Okay. So one of the dilemmas in individuality is that people become fixated on repetition, or maybe the old, because there's no mutation. On the surface of things, you end up with certain dilemmas, like people who don't have the mutation because of, let's say, painful limitations, okay, depending on your type. To even pull it away further from type to make it just more general and broad, let's imagine we're in a incarceration. No mutation, we're stuck in a little cell. That's really repetitive to have the same boring pattern every day, whatever it is, to be in that particular jail cell. So those of you who have a 3, Ross says it can be very painful to carry that 3 and not have real mutation take hold in your life. Because with the not self, it's quite possible that despite the presence of this activation of the 3, that there is no real mutation, as in no real transformation that is there to get the results of that. Now, remember too, empowerment, right? Individuality, mutation, empowerment, or not. So interestingly, I was diagnosed with a tumor and I haven't gotten the blood test yet, but he said that cancer is a mutation, a negative mutation. And I found that quite interesting, right? Failed mutation, we know as far as autistics is not the full mutation of what it is to be rave because we don't have the vehicle that has it's not present yet here. The vehicle itself, the bodies that can house a rave baby haven't been born yet. So not that it's failed as in it could have succeeded, just that its time was not present yet. Time, here and now. Okay. Remember this now frequency, both 10 and 3. Now is so critical and key when it comes to being here now. That third gate in its pulse engine, that is the direct result of the function of the magnetic monopole. It's an extraordinary pulse engine, this 3. It's the direct result of the function of the magnetic monopole because, as a wonder of the knowledge, magnetic, it pulls, it draws, and as a pole, it's unidirectional. It's only doesn't have two sides to the magnet. It's holding, the ajna, the design crystal, and the personality together. So the monopole giving us our direction or geometry in this life, holding us together in this illusion of Maya. It's you could call it a GPS, Ross says, with the monopole, the global positioning system. This is our thing that holds us together and moves us in the right direction. So everything about the magnetic monopole is there in its name. It's magnetic, okay? Monopole, extraordinarily only attracting, not repelling. So the very force of attraction holding us together in this illusion of separateness. And that monopole is the thing that can hold the design crystal and the personality through the link nodes, design north node, personality south node, through the link nodes. And the moment that you're not operating in alignment, you don't get your color motivation. You remember? So this monopole holding us together is the only way we can be held in this illusion. And how it holds us together in the illusion is through the function that we call color, the level below the line. And color on the personality side is unstable. By design, it's designed to be unstable. That is color, personality, transference. Color is always potentially in transference, especially if you're a 4. Remember? A 4 transfers so easily. So literally what transference means is the movement mathematically from the 1 to the 4, or the 4 to the 1, from the 2 to the 5, or the 3 to the 6, relative to whatever color it happens to be that is yours, that's in you. So that monopole holds us together in the illusion of separateness through the capture frequency. Transference allows the capture frequency to operate. That's interesting when it comes to the 4th color, because it's fascinating how the 4th color, now I'm going to quote Rock specifically. He says, the 4th color is always in transference. It has to be that way. Otherwise, the monopole would not be able to do its work. So now we're going to go into Advanced Mechanics 1, page 12. So quote, the monopole that holds us together in the illusion of our separateness. And how does the monopole do that? It does that through capture frequency. The fact is that it is the transference that allows the capture frequency to operate, and all of that because of the fourth color. But the first thing I can say to you is that there is only one color. That's the thing that's so interesting, isn't it? It isn't to say that there aren't variations, but in essence, everything carries some kind of fourth color value. And that fourth color value, it's that value that the magnetic monopole recognizes and the magnetic monopole captures. The thing to understand about the four is that everything is of it. So the themes of four transference that we talked about, the way in which the four can transfer not simply to the one, which is opposite to it, but it can transfer in all these different directions, not because it is going to them, but in a sense, they are already of it. In order for the monopole to be able to do its job and to be able to capture, it has to have this quality. So back to in terms of the moon and its impact on the cycle, remember the resonance principle of color and line? So when the moon impacts the third gate, and there is this fourth line and its resonance to the fourth color, as this goes deeper, by the way, it's changing the way that the monopole holds the vehicle together, and it's changing its direction, the vehicle's direction, that moon. So in other words, the activation in the fourth line in gate 3 is where it is having its potential impact, and it's going to be on the driver itself. So the moon, in other words, going through gate 3, hitting fourth line, it's going to affect the magnetic monopole. And this is really interesting for us to see here. The pulse compression, again, magnetic field mutation, gate 3. Ross says, the moment that the monopole changes the way in which it holds the illusion together, the illusion begins to go into its final stages. So that space, pulse compression, when he speaks to this, it means that the space between the pulses are getting narrowed. And basically what that's doing is it's turning off the fertile mutative capacity of the 3. It's just turning it off. And those spaces are absolutely essential. As those spaces are compressed closer and closer, the pulses being compressed closer and closer together, eventually go back to the hospital. What happens when they go fast, 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 fast? Eventually, boom, flatline. So stasis and ultimately death, of course, follows that. So there are two things we're looking at here in the binary of the pulse. We've been looking at the magnetic field mutation. According to Ra, this magnetic field mutation is simply the ultimate impact that the third gate is going to have on gate 2, the driver, the monopole itself. And that monopole, when it changes the way in which it holds the illusion together, now the illusion begins to go into its final stages, what we call death. Remember, he wants to remind us that the monopole has no problem with death, right? Because it's like the unconditional love of the monopole and the design crystal separating, that longing, that yearning inside of you that looks for, even yearns for, going home, death. That's the monopole. So it's, Ross says, if I can anthropomorphize it, and I can't, it's even looking forward to it, that death. So it can fulfill its great love with the design crystal to be one with it. And for most of the time, what they are mostly, unless they're embodied, is perfection, absolutely perfection. So the monopole has no resistance to the gate 3 instructing it to go move towards the death process. It welcomes it, has no problem with death. So one of the things about this difficulty at the beginning gate of ordering When there is pulse compression, there's no longer an organizing frequency. Ordering, gate 3. Bringing order out of the confusion, yeah? Limitation, gate 60. So it's a deep, deep binary bringing confusion out of the order. That's very interesting the way he says that. I would think it would be order out of the confusion. But on the flip side, too, deep binary, confusion out of the order because of this pulse compression happening, turning it off. Yeah. He says, quote, "It's clear to me that one of the byproducts of the moon going through the third gate is that this can be the place where dementia or any of those late life losses of memory, all of those things. I think this is probably where the triggering point is. It goes back to the nature of that third gate, the nature of what happens when there is this pulse compression. There is no longer an organizing frequency. So it's very important to see this third gate carrying the real triggering influence because it goes beyond what is almost psychological, the way that the 10th gate triggers through the behavior, how quickly our behavior is related to survival. You know, behavior is reflected back upon the personality, where your personality is influenced by what appears to be deterioration. So we remember if your body is in a dysregulated state, you're in pain or whatever, then the personality is affected, absolutely. But this is beyond psychology. If you get to the 3 with the moon here in this death process, you're really getting to the body, the vehicle itself. And this is something that becomes concretized potentially, the pulse compression that is going to take away your creative juices. If we're on death's doorway, are we very creative, reproductive? No, not at all. This sacral center brings us to life and it turns life off. If we think about the auric frequency of a generator, this open, enveloping, and very, very powerful force, that life-giving fecundity, reproductivity, it's not about the sacral bringing death, but just the motor of life no longer functioning correctly, where it doesn't have this fertile capacity to be able to imbibe or imbue the vehicle with a life force. It just can't anymore. It's done. So the 4th line charisma has an influence throughout the entire body. You remember how the 4th line is very contagious, right? It's gonna share things with others. So we have this here in the 4th line of the 3rd gate, where if the moon clicks in and the death process has already begun with a 10, but then here, there's the influence in the entirety, where it influences everything throughout the body at the deepest level. Because when you think about this 3rd gate, as far as the single-celled organism, you remember, we have the flow and the 3rd gate that creates the design of a cell. So every aspect of life, all the vast cellular life force, has this 15-5 and of course this 3rd gate. So the 3rd gate is always open to a possible mutation, the possibility of a new dynamic energy, a new dynamic life force, or not. Because here we have the pulse compression in the gate 3, line 4, this influence that's going to affect every single cell, because we have a holistic vehicle. It's interesting, you know, allopathic medicine tends to compartmentalize the body, you know, especially back in the day. And we have all kinds of specialties, don't we? Doctors who specialize in this or that or the other thing. But it's one thing. It's one body. Yeah, same thing here. It's one body. If you analyze a gate and take it out of context, you just look at it in isolation, you're not really looking at the entirety of the vehicle. So we can't isolate this one aspect of our vehicle, isolating its phenomena from all other aspects. So then there's a relationship in the genetic continuity of the way that this works throughout the entire vehicle. Yeah, genetic continuity. So there's now we're learning about here, gate 3, line 4, innate quality, which attracts valued guidance. So to be educated about dying or dying process and what bardo is absolutely critical for us as human beings. And generally what happens is it's around the midlife, generally speaking, because people at that age, the body begins to start to break down and, are faced with your mortality, generally speaking. Not everybody, but generally speaking. So Ra wants us to learn this so that we can die correctly, in that we can, not only for us, but also bring other people support to understand the mechanical processes of it, how essential it is, so that you're not trying to teach somebody when they're about to die, they're on their deathbed and they're 85 and they're ready to go. It's not going to work that way. So right around this time, in fact, when I was listening to this audio, it felt very inspiring and moving to someday, be able to help somebody with this. First, of course, going through my own process. Perfect, right on time. Thank you. Thank you very much. Because it's time to, be a part of life. And if you hide your head in the sand about death, you're not really living. Being equipped for life, Ross says, is about understanding what death is. And that can be taught to anyone, really, at any time in their life. What if you specialized because you had a personal experience of losing a child? I remember when I was younger, one of our family friends lost a 4-year-old to leukemia, and how valuable it might be to help the grieving parents, as well as, if you could get there soon enough, the children in their process. But generally speaking, it's the midlife where there's most people will come across an introduction to what the close of life is all about, faced with their own mortality. When you're young, I'm going to live forever. You don't really think about death unless you have some kind of illness. Oh, there was something in this too about how the mutation takes hold relative to your genetic predisposition towards certain diseases, actually from the grandparents or parents, your genetic lineage happening here in the 3-2. So prepare somebody long, long, long beforehand, if possible. Generally speaking, though, people, when they're in pain, that's when they tend to get help. So maybe you catch people before they're on death's doorway, as far as helping to help everyone that is on your fractal live their life correctly is part of the process. This strategy and authority, getting us in touch with living our lives in alignment so that we can complete the whole process correctly. So fascinating. Everyone who faces dying is looking for guidance. Initially, it's you go and look on the internet. How can I avoid dying? If you're a 3 and you're not in alignment, you might get to this place of, why me? Why now? And Ross says that's not a good place to be. In fact, to avoid that, you see, because that's the beginning of the end. There's this innate quality which attracts valued guidance that's built into all of us, genetically speaking, built into all of us. All of these wisdom potentials, they're all of us have access to all of it. It's just that some things genetically are fixed, and that we see in our differentiated design. So the line of charisma, 4th lines, attracting the forces you need, literally. So there's this deep magnetic monopole joke, according to Ra, where the reconnection after the death takes place, because there's all kinds of levels of meaning when it comes to this keynote. At the center of it, what that strikes him is that it's innate, that everyone who's facing dying is looking for guidance. And the most important guidance is whatever you receive at the end. So, we have all these exalted um, quotes on his deathbed, he said, or we have those books, the blue entry keynote above the line itself is always an indication of the process that takes a long time in this lifetime to mature. So it's a maturing theme in the life. The bold blue, or in other words, the umbrella line, you would call it, the most important guidance, whatever it is that you get at the end. Because if you look around the world, most of us are never coming back to this planet. Because according to Ra, his prophecies was the fact that humans as a species would have a sharp contraction in the amount of humans that are going to be born. And if we have a sharp contraction and there's, 8 billion people here, if there's not as many vehicles and there's only 13, 12, 150 or whatever more years, then obviously we're not going to have that many more people be born into this life. So this body is always, it's one precious life, it's one precious incarnation. So he says, everybody, just about every other person you look at isn't coming back. They're not. So then what happens? In our genetic lineage, like deep within the cells of our genes, we have memory. And this species of ours, human beings, have gone through incredible cataclysms over our span of time on this planet. We have this genetic memory deep within us that we know. And of course, the personality knows, but also the body at this base fundamental core knows that it's a buried fear that, this is an end game. Nobody gets out alive. So the valued guidance in order to prepare for your death, particularly when you're being faced with your death, you get a diagnosis that could be terminal, they call it, One of the things that Ra says, it's kind of dramatic. Page 62 of this manual, he says, the third gate screams for, you need to be guided in this. You need to be guided out of the death lock. You need to be guided into the death embrace, because the third gate will take you either way. You need to have somebody in your life who prepares you, that we need to be prepared. So that there's a genetic drive inside of us, he speaks to, that our human species, all of us, we need to be guided, we need to be raised, we need to be taught, we need to be told how things work. We pass on through our genes to our children or whoever we are responsible for raising. We pass on the guidance that of the people that have come before. Think about, the traditions and the songs and the stories and everything, moralities and fables and everything that teaches us certain things about life. It's just how this vehicle works. We're not born with all of this awareness. We have to be conditioned and groomed, so to speak. So dying, when it comes to where you need guidance the most, it's when you're getting to this place in space, because death is a place, correctly, in order to die in alignment. So look at the Neptune. It says, a psychic attunement that magnetizes nurturing, psychic energy which attracts nourishment and ensures ordering. It was also in that book I was reading this morning about codons, nourishment, that human beings need nourishment, not only for the intelligence, but also nourishment to ensure the correct ordering of our death process. I don't know where else there might be psychic attunement anywhere. This might be the only place. Ra calls it a fuzzy statement. What are we referring to here? So he wrote this Rave I Ching for the living. But what we can do is deconstruct the line, because it also serves a purpose in the death cycle, where our psychic energy, which attracts nourishment and ensures ordering, or the psychic energy, which attracts nourishment and ensures the correct ordering of the process of the death engagement or a dying process. Ra says, don't go to your death with a question. That's what he learned from Neptune. He learned this great, great thing of don't ask why me and don't ask why now, which is, the lament of the three. Why me? In not self, in not self. Why here? Why now? Because he says, every time you do that, you put a nail in the coffin of your spirituality. Don't ask why. That's not the point. Oh, about Neptune. Neptune is the simple surrender to whether life is going to flourish when you return for another round in the cycle, or whether maybe life is going to come to a close on this plane. We can't approach dying correctly without our own spirituality because it's a deeply mystical process. Bardo is mystical, the most mystical things that you can teach here in human design. So if you're someone with a mystical bent, congratulations, you made it. I look forward to hearing your process with all of this. This Mars in detriment on the other side is where the demands of the ego lead to rejection. In other words, confused energy that needs nourishment, but is generally rejected. So this is the psychic energy that attracts nourishment and ensures the correct ordering of the death process. So there's no final lock until the moon reaches 29, remember. We can reject the death process. It's until we get to the 29 that there still is a turning back. But once you've gotten to the 29 process, the body says no to life. You're a goner. You're done for. So really, truly, when it gets to the 14 and brings the countdown, that's when we have the complete process. But there's this influence of the three that we're at where we reach the point where we can make a difference physically. Okay? We can actually counsel, consult, guide, advise where the moon is still in the three, because this moon can move us towards the dying process. Maybe you're taking on the accoutrement, Ra says, of what it is to be in the dying cycle, when actually you're not really dying, where some people get locked into long-term depressions. And in the audio, Genoa, the Human Design America College dean, shared a story about a lady who kind of got locked into that depression after a transit like that, and a particularly traumatic, I think it was a car accident and injury. So we have these two sides, the potential of the psychic attunement and the right nourishment, the right force. So that right nourishment is part of the stage of the whole movement as you move from gate 10 to 3, 11 or 12 days, whether this is part of an ongoing process of a cycle for you. So let's say you've got a cancer diagnosis and they gave you 6 months to live. It's so sad to me to hear my mom, oh yeah, he's doing better, but it's terminal, so it's just a matter of time, Well, yeah, it is. But until you get to that point of no return, how different is it than any other day in the life? We're always dying, you know? It's just that when you have an end date, so saith the man in the white coat, or women, or whatever, they, where we're going through the mutation is always happening. And then when we get to this place where the mutation has its lessons at the end, at the end of the door closing and then another one opens. So when we return to initiation, we come back into the world of either the form because we've been reincarnated, or if we're still alive, then we just, back into the mind game, the Maya game, the mind strip. So this mystery of Neptune is that there's a great healing that can take place with Neptune here, actually physically here in this gate. That psychic energy which attracts nourishment, ensuring ordering, coming back from death's doorway or not. So the Mars is the click going to be there, that death that's going to be there, this death knell, according to Ra, where the duality and the fundamental triggering forces can be seen. Thanks to this third gate, stage 2 of the death process. So the dying and rebirth process as the moon moves around the wheel, where the third gate is very deeply instrumental in all of this, is that it's one of the first physical connection things that we have here because it's sacral. So you're dealing with the identity, yeah, with the 10. And then the very power of the sacral center and how forceful, how powerful that can be. Remember, all sacral gates have power. They're all powerful gates. Because we're all unique with our own unique configurations and definitions, all of us are going to be impacted differently in terms of the sensitivity that we have to this. We can be incredibly unaware of the cycle because it doesn't have anything affecting our particular design. You know, let's say you don't have anything of these gates inside of your own design. So then you have no recognition potentially of the moon moving through those places because it's just as part of the background frequency, you know, the environmental frequency. It's not really personal. But like with Ra, how he had an activation that with the moon there would affect him quite dramatically. I remember him saying something about, I know it's going to be a bad day. With the 10, he would recognize it. But because he had the 60, okay, he had his own 60, but absolutely no gate activations in the sacral. It was only a few days later that he would notice that the moon had moved through the 3, apparently, according to him. So we could be unaware, depends on your design. We might want to see what's there, and I look forward to hearing what y'all notice as you watch the moon move through the cycle. I wish we had an app that would tell us the moon's movement, like an auditory. I have this Vedic astrology app that tells me what hour of the day as far as what planetary ruler is there, and I quite like it. But to know where the moon is, like audibly reminding me, that would be nice to pay attention, to better pay attention. Because, you know, projector is focused on what's right in front of them. I imagine a reflector would be able to attune to this more deeply, of course, since they're lunar beings. So let's say somebody walks into the room, and because me with them or you with them, they form a definition, of course. Oh, we see that. Yeah, we notice that. As a projector, you're not necessarily aware of self. Manifestor too. You can recognize your impact. Ross said that. But yourself, kind of hard to be aware of. So it's nice as a projector to have somebody in your life who can tell you, hey, you know, you really don't look so good. And then, oh, you're right. I really don't look well. You might be aware of that. But that's conditioning, you know? What's their definition of well? So we always have to run it through our own authority. In this moon in 10th gate, remember, it brings out the deep, deep behavioral things. Maybe, oh, wow, we're really going downhill. But when it gets to the third, the moon gets to the third gate and kicks in. Now we have this physical impact. And then the 29th gate. That's a lock, everyone, you know? But if, according to Ra, there's that potential for people to get stuck at the third gate. He called it Alzheimer's stuff, where people become terminal or hypochondriacs or whatever the case may be, where they get stuck there, you know, locked there, depressed there, because there's a lot of damage that can be done to our bodies when we are incorrect, or the psychology that is incorrect during the cycle of the moon. You can get locked out from mutation. So hitting the right combinations of design where the moon in the cycle is hitting the 2 at a particular time, as far as even though that being might survive something physically, What long-term impact, either physically or mentally, psychologically, is that moon in gate 3 going to have on them? There may be something there. There's this on my body graph, if you accidentally type in an URL they don't have, or you click in a broken link, it has a little guy in a space suit floating around saying, lost in the Maya. You could get lost without mutation suddenly, unexpectedly. So there's this dualistic potential in the third gate, right? Off and on, there and gone. He says that it's the gate that can allow you to bypass the 29, the 14, and the 2. Those gates that have an impact on you or us, all of us, since we're embodied, when it comes to the death process. You don't really have a noticeable impact unless you're really into the closing of your cycle, their death process. But the 3 is the one that really makes a difference. So you're either going to get caught or not at that point. And this is what brings out that basic duality. Remember, pulse compression here, pulse compression, the magnetic field mutation. So are we going to continue to generate, or are we going to begin the degenerative process to continue to have the same space between the pulses, or shut down the distance between the pulses and bring into the limitation on fertility? Is there going to be a transition in the way in which the magnetic monopole or mutation of the monopole's frequency happens, or is there not? So when I think I was 19, it's around that time, maybe 20, I was at home because I didn't feel well, and everybody went to a party. I was married already and living with my husband's family. They had a really big house and he didn't want to move out. And I'm like, okay, no problem. I'm still young. And everybody was at a party, New Year's party, and I had all this pain. And I can remember being rushed to the hospital because I was so scared. And it was a cyst, left ovary, an ovarian cyst. God, I hate catheters. I know this is a little bit too much information, but my whole life I've known about ovarian cysts as far as, yeah, it's common. Lots of women get them. And I just was like, my mind was like, there's got to be some kind of linkage. I don't know if it's consistent throughout everybody going through their midlife crisis potentially and having some kind of health issue that is like a wake-up call to make you pay attention to your life. But the fact that the sacral center is our reproductivity, obviously for me as a woman, it's my ovaries. And the fact that my Chiron is in the gate 3, line 3. Yeah, the underlying issue would be the 3.2. So that's why I went into looking at the codon mapping and just researching into anything I could find when it comes to, yeah, the size of the tumor is like a lime size. So it's quite a dangerous thing to continue on with. And yeah, is it the door of death? It's a great mystery. We don't know. As far as our minds being out of the game, you know, the game of life, this body, we play a certain game because we have a certain body. I was born into a female body. I'm part Asian. I'm short. You know, I play this game. I'm attracted to men. You know, I've had husbands. I play this game. But when it comes to exiting the body, unless you've had an out of body experience, which the personality can do, not like it's always embodied according to Ra. I can't remember if it was this audio or another one, but being able to detach, you know, the mystery in terms of what death comes for all of us. How we get there, now we know it's not a mystery at all. It's just an ending, a close of a door. So the door to close properly on our lives has to do with mechanically. It doesn't have to do with anything else. Ra loved being a door closer. He said he was really good at it. And that's what this human design knowledge is all about, which I find quite fascinating because when you think about how he said human design is for children, it's not for you, it's for children. Yeah, that was often repeated. So that got locked into me. Oh, it's for children, it's for the future. Even to this day, still to remember or to teach the term Rahu, which he uses to speak about the nature of the North Node. I think of Ruhu, Rahu for the future. But truly, he was told by the voice that this is end knowledge, that he was the door closer. So that all of us have to be ready for that door without the concerns that plague the not self when it comes to confronting the body's terminal vehicular trajectory. I did not read that. It's just trying to describe what I see. It's difficult for our not selves, isn't it? If you get scared, terrified, like physically, so much pain and suffering, and anybody else hate hospitals? Oh, yeah, that's me. So to have to be rushed to one, your mind immediately goes to, is this the end? My husband thought I was dying. So is this the end? Is my wife dying right now? He was not helping. He was very dysregulated and not calming, not able to handle because it was so dramatic. Not being able to communicate to him what happened or what I was doing on the floor. And yeah, anyway, when we get to this place of fear where that we're not going to live out our purpose, what if we haven't had a satisfying, successful, peaceful, surprising life yet? Can you imagine? I'm so grateful that you're here with me, that we all get to feel the beauty of what it is to be in our own authority. Because what Ross says is if you don't know what it is to guide your own life, to be correct in this life, that death is always cruel. And that is the end. There's one more quote here. He says, I think as part of any kind of holistic teaching, that understanding the dying process, the bardo process, is essential information. It's as essential as anything else that we have in human design, whether it's your type or your PHS, internal fixing or your tonal trajectory on your personality side, or any of the many ways in which we can see the ways in which we are designed. It's magic. It really is. The personality loves getting it right. It wants to know. It needs to know. And when it does know, there is always the potential for surrender mentally, always. So it's not a body thing. It's the mind surrendering to the choicelessness that is our grace. Trust your aura, love yourself. We are complete.